Well, good afternoon, friends. This is Moosa with The Naked Truth, and I wanted to briefly update you. I was asked by several viewers to see the specific information with both candidates, John Flores and Chris Coughlin, talking about property taxes, and we're going to get that rolling here in a second. But I wanted to give you a brief tutorial on the property taxes in the first place. The City of Johns Creek, once a year, will get the property tax digest from the Fulton County Tax Commissioner. And that will be the sum value of all the properties located within Johns Creek. Using that number, the city multiplies by the current millage rate to come up with how much revenue is going to be generated. If that amount is higher than the previous year because the tax base went up, then it's considered a tax increase. So according to Georgia law, even if the millage rate stays the same, but the property tax base goes up, the residents in total experience a tax increase. In order to keep the tax flows to the city at the same level as the prior year, if the tax base goes up, you have to lower the millage rate. So keep that in mind as you're listening to these two candidates speaking about taxes and the millage rate and that, and I'll interject as before with some important comments. Thank you.
John, what is your position on the current millage rate? Do you believe it should stay the same, go up, or go down?
I definitely don't think it should go up. The millage rate, if you look at it from a more in-depth perspective, oftentimes it's commensurate with the home values and where they are. I would say that I would never vote for an increase in the millage rate. I think we can all agree that we pay enough in property taxes. However, when you look at the millage rate and the property tax rate compared to your HOA, typically, and I know here in St Ives, you're paying more for your HOA than you are for your property taxes. Thankfully in Doublegate, we have a voluntary HOA fee of $85, so y'all are more than welcome to move to Doublegate if you want to. But what I would say is, if the millage rate is commensurate with home values, and it doesn't seem to be overburdening families, then I think it's okay where it is. However...
Okay, did you just hear that? If the property taxes are not overburdening families, then our taxes are not too high. And that's a big concern to me as a voter, that I am going to be living in one of the wealthiest cities in the state of Georgia and probably the country, and as long as the property taxes are not a burden, then it's not likely that they are too high. I want you to think about that for a second. I'd think about it for more than 1 second, to be honest, but let's keep going.
Again, it goes back to looking at things comprehensively. You cannot make broad macro brushstrokes when it comes to decisions like this. So what I would say is, with proper communication with citizens, with proper communication with residents of Johns Creek, if it begins to become overburdening, then you have to take a look at it.
Okay, so I'm going to pause again because I think the most important factor that needs to be stated here is that if you, on behalf of the city government, are passing a tax increase on the public, it is you that should have a very strong and clear reason for taxation of the public. You do not put the burden on the residents to prove to the city government that they are being overtaxed, that it is a burden to them. So let's think about how Mr. Flores thinks this process should work, because I think it's crucial as to whether or not you will be selecting an official who's looking out for your interest or who's looking out to see how much tax revenue they can generate before the public starts to scream that too much is too much.
And then you have to cut it. At the end of the day, I'm all for less taxes. But you have to look at the marketplace. If the marketplace isn't screaming we have a problem with the millage rate.
Okay, so here we are with the comment about the marketplace screaming about the millage rate. But what if the marketplace is not screaming? What if there's just slight discontent? What if everybody's homes in the community have risen by, say, 7% because that's what the Fulton County Tax Commissioner has said they've risen? And are we going to pass on a 7% tax increase to the residents of Johns Creek just because we can, because there's not a strong outward cry against this increase, but just a soft murmur. I'm not really sure I understand that process whatsoever. What we really need to do is have a process where the city of Johns Creek figures out what it needs and for what purposes, and then how much money they need to generate. And it should be more of a minimal process. We don't start out by seeing how much money we have and then go find places to spend it. It should be the other way around. We should have our priorities, figure out what we need to spend, and to figure out how much money we need to cover those expenses and make sure that that amount is reasonable.
From a majority standpoint, then I don't know if you just immediately start to cut it. I mean, I personally am okay with where it is. Would I like for it to be yes? Sure. But I think it's okay where it is because I know what I want the city of Johns Creek to be. And I understand that the property tax income, the revenue that comes into the city, provides for things that add value to my family. Parks, police officers, fire department. It pays for the things that make this city so great. So if we were, again, if you make a broad brushstroke and say, I'm just going to cut it, then you got to understand downrange financially, what programs are you going to cut?
All right, so Mr. Coughlin's going to address that in a second about what programs you're going to cut, but as I alluded to in the other video, I don't think Mr. Flores understands. Each and every year we have a budget surplus, and we've had a budget surplus by a large margin. We are not like the federal government that runs a budget deficit each and every year and then the money's just printed and they spend it. By law, the city of Johns Creek has a balanced budget to start with, and we always end up with more money than what we expected in the end because of the way the system works. We are and have been overtaxed each and every year since our creation, which led to the big budget surplus that Mr. Coughlin has talked about in the past. So let's keep flowing.
Because your revenue is going to go down. And so you have to look at it in a much more due diligence manner before you just say cut. So what I would say is I'm not opposed to it. Definitely not going to increase it. I'll never vote to increase it. But prior to cutting it, we need to have a hard conversation of what does this do to directly impact me and other residents of the city.
Okay, so now we're going to go into Mr. Coughlin's conversation on the current millage rate, and we'll see how that compares to what Mr. Flores has said.
Hey, Chris, what is your position on the current millage rate? Do you believe it should stay the same, go up, or go down?
I'm going to continue to discuss this. Again, we take in 10% more than we spend every year. So property taxes account for about 30% of our revenues, right? So essentially, you could cut property taxes by 30% and have a balanced budget. That's how much extra money we bring in every year.
So just to put that in my terminology, we could cut the property taxes by 30% and we would still have a balanced budget and we would not lose any programs or services that are currently offered within Johns Creek. So that is really important to understand, especially when someone continues to say, if we do cut the millage rate, we may end up having to cut services going forward, because that's simply not accurate.
So I was a proponent of putting it around 3.9, which was about a 12% reduction. And they did lower it to give us some tax relief, but we don't just keep taxes the same. The government taxes to provide services. We don't do it because it could alter reasons or it alters revenue. When we spend money, we get the services we spend it on, right? So essentially, you could cut the millage rate to 4 and not impact service at all. And I'm going to continue to, break on that point. It's ridiculous that we keep saying we can't cut taxes without impacting services. We can. The CAFR, all our financial reports show that. The 10-year financial plans show that. Everything shows that. So I don't understand why we keep having this discussion that we need to keep taxes here, because we shouldn't just be taxed for the sake of being taxes. We should be taxed for the services rendered.
I think the last few comments by Mr. Coughlin shows that he really gets it and understands what role taxation plays within a community. Our mayor has said many times, is the juice worth the squeeze? And I'm not going to say he was referring to just taxes, but if we look at our business taxes and some of the charges that we implement on businesses, such as if you have a lounge or a restaurant and you have a second bar, the city adds a second major tax just because you have a second bar in your restaurant. You may not actually sell any more alcohol. It might just be for convenience sake for your establishment, for instance. However, the city of Johns Creek is going to get their piece of that pie, regardless of whether it generates additional revenue to you. So anyway, back to the property taxes, I believe Mr. Coughlin gets it and understands it. So there's two very different views on taxation here between these two candidates. One feels that as long as the public is not screaming about the rate of taxes and it's not appearing to be overburdening to the majority and the market's not screaming about it, for however you might want to interpret that, then probably the property taxes are not too high. Whereas Chris Coughlin looks at the revenues that are streaming into the city coffers versus what we're spending, recognizes that we have a budget surplus, and realizes that some of those revenues rightfully belong back in your own pocket. So hopefully before you go vote, you think about these two things and where Johns Creek is headed and how we want to spend the money that's being taken from us collectively and spent on behalf of the citizens of Johns Creek overall. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions or feedback, you are more than welcome to email me, ejmusa@yahoo.com, and I'll be happy to return your emails. Once again, thank you very much.